Hey everybody, it's Andrea Ankrum with Indivisible Northern Kentucky District 4, and welcome to another episode of our Coffee Klatch conversation with candidates. This is where we bring your candidate to you, and through a question and answer forum, you get to know your candidate's stance on issues that affect Kentuckians today. So we have questions that are made up here, but if you're watching online on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel, please, we encourage you to send questions in to us and we will get them to your candidate. So tonight's guest is Buddy Wheatley. Hello, how are you?
Hello, thank you.
Buddy's running for the House seat in District 65. So Buddy, why don't you tell our audience why you're running for office and a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, about myself first. I'll start with House District 65, the state representative that would represent most of Covington, all of Ludlow, all of Bromley, most of Park Hills, all of Kentonville, and a little sliver of Taylor Mill. So again, my name is Buddy Wheatley. I'm very proud to be running for state representative in this district because I feel like I really do know and represent and will represent the whole district. I have a strong connection to the district. I was born here. I was born on Pleasant Street in Covington. Our family moved to West Covington in the mid-60s. I do come from a large family. I have 11 brothers and sisters. There were 6 boys and 6 girls. I went to St. Anne's grade school up in West Covington, and from there went on to Ludlow High School. Was a proud Panther, a graduate of Ludlow High School. From there I did go on straight to the University of Kentucky, and I got my bachelor's degree in journalism. Started in journalism right away. Worked for the Recorder newspapers out in Boone County and then into Kenton County. It was a rewarding career, enjoyed writing. I was ready to do maybe something a little bit different a few years later, and I had this decision to make. By this time I was working for Federal Express, but the fire department called, and my brother is a firefighter. My father had just retired from the fire department.
Oh, wow.
My grandfather was a Covington firefighter. My great-grandfather, wow. And obviously there's a tradition there, and it was something that I made the move to public service, and it was an easy one. But you know, I do have to say, you know, there were some considerations when you make those moves, and one had to do with the schedules of firefighters and the benefits related to being a Covington firefighter. Had a wonderful career there. Actually got involved with the union very early on. That's the Covington Professional Firefighters Local 38. I was involved with the negotiating team, got involved with the safety committee, and then went on and got on the executive committee. I was proud to be an executive board member for 8 years, and I really helped run the local, and along with the other executive board members, and really got to know the legislative process and the collective bargaining process and how important that is, and what it can do for the workers and for you know, working families, and how important it is to have that voice. So from there, you know, when I was rose through the ranks at the fire department, was up to the captain rank, and I had decided not to take any more promotional tests because I was very happy to be in the union. I didn't really want to move on, but I knew that I was going to be retiring within a few years, and I decided I was going to go on to law school, and I did. I entered law school in 2004. And another thing, another avenue in the road arose where the fire chief's job became available. I did consult with my family and labor people, and you know, labor is very near and dear to me, and it was a difficult choice to move to management, but it was a great choice, and I did go on to be the fire chief for the city of Covington. Served 3 years, had a incredible career as a Covington Fire Department chief, and I went on to complete law school. And when I completed law school, my intention, even in going to law school, was to become a labor attorney, and that's what I've done since then. I've been a solo labor attorney since I graduated from law school in 2009, and became very busy in the law. Actually went on to become, and still am, the General Counsel for the Kentucky Professional Firefighters. So I work primarily on behalf of firefighters throughout the state of Kentucky, and have gotten to know the state very well, got to know the legislative process in Frankfort very well. And it was during this time that I had that feeling of maybe wanting to give back more, wanting to be a part of the answer, and not the problems. I'd seen a lot of things that had happened in Frankfort, wasn't very happy with that. I joined the Kenton County Executive Committee of the Democratic Party and was starting to recruit some good local Democrats to run for office. And the question that got thrown back at me a couple times was, why don't you do it? And when the 65th District State Representative Arnold Simpson announced his retirement, and I had talked to Representative Simpson before and said, maybe I'll give it some consideration. I really wasn't all that serious about it, but when it come time to do it and make the decision, and I did make the decision, consult with my family and my wife. It was an easy decision, and I feel fully committed, and I look forward to serving the 65th District. There's a lot of work to do when you run for office. We're fully committed to doing it, and we're in the process of doing it. So I say I'm responding to the call. There was a call for public service here, and that's what I feel like I'm doing. I have no real specific agenda. Most of my issues are economic issues, but that's really the main reason I'm getting into this.
Okay. All right, so we'll jump right into our questions, and our first question is probably something that is near and dear to your heart, and it's about the public employee pensions, right? And so we know about Senate Bill 1, what happened with that during this past session, voted down or not brought out into for a vote, but then they tacked on this proposal at the end of the sewage bill, and they passed it. So what is your understanding of the public employees pension issue in including current funding issues?
Well, the pension issue, I've always seen it as two things. We have the funding obligation. Some people call it the unfunded liabilities that we have, and they're there and they're significant. Whether that is a crisis or whether it's a disaster waiting to happen, I don't really see it that way, but that's one issue, is the funding obligations. And then there is the future funding and the future pensions that we're going to have for the state of Kentucky and for our public employees. So while there is those things do connect in ways, they are two distinct things, and how we do pensions going forward is something that we certainly need to analyze and to use the best information that we have to make decisions on how we're going to do things in the future. Now, the pension bill that was snuck through or slid through, depends on how you want to call it, at the end of the session, it was a disturbing thing that happened, the way it happened. Especially with the non-transparency of a party that said that they were going to be much more transparent when they came into power. It didn't happen that way. It happened in a way that really it shocked a lot of people and gave us all a lot less confidence in the way our government works. I am truly a defined benefit person who believes in the defined benefit of a pension. Now, I think most people understand now that we've really gotten to talk about this pension issue for as long as we have, but there is defined benefit and defined contribution systems. And defined benefit systems are where there is a set benefit for the rest of your life, and that's what most public employees have at this time. Not all public employees, and I can go into that a little bit here when we further define what the other pension system is. The other pension system, most of the people in private sector have something like a 401k plan, a defined contribution plan, where in actuality there's not great differences. It's just that when you reach retirement or reach the time in a defined contribution system, you're going to make some decisions about when to retire, how much money you're going to get when you retire. And during all the time that you are contributing, you're going to make decisions about investments and about how much to have in certain areas and the fees that are being charged. There's a lot there. And the people who have defined contribution plans, they often wonder, why should the public employees be entitled to defined benefit, where you reach to a point where you retire and then you get the same benefit for the rest of your life. Well, in essence, as you just heard, they're not really all that different. The person who has a defined contribution plan has to make all those decisions. There's a lot of pension, there's a lot of retirement insecurity with that. And with defined benefit plans, for one, they have been proven, and there's plenty of research and plenty of data that shows that you can run them just as well, if not better, for a state and than a defined contribution plan. We'll call it a 401k plan. Kentucky has a hybrid cash balance plan, which is what we call Tier 3 in the CERS system, that is like this defined contribution plan. But there's a lot of there's a lot of retirement insecurity in that. And you have to think about your investments, think about, what are you going to do, when you're going to retire, and there's just a lot less security in that. And we really think, I'm a strong believer in with defined benefit, the teachers, the firefighters, the police officers, our state workers, our corrections officers, we need to make them secure in their position to not have to worry about those things. They've got enough to do, and they have plenty to do as public employees. But the least that we can do, and we can do it on a level that is not a lucrative benefit when they retire, but it's a steady benefit that they can have for the rest of their lives. It's worth doing when it can be done as well as we can do it. There's a lot of reasons why they're not funded as well as they should be, but it is something that we should continue to promise for the rest of their lives. And that's not only for our current retirees, but that's for our future retirees. So I have a little anecdote about the hybrid cash balance system. I was the fire chief in the city of Covington, and we would have an entrance exam to become a firefighter every 2 years. So in 2014, when the hybrid cash balance plan went into effect, the Tier 3 plan, and it affected hazardous duty employees, so police officers in the county and cities, we would have, before 2014, we would have about 300 people, maybe a little bit more than that, sign up to take the entrance exam. Well, I can tell you that number has steadily dropped over the last 4 tests. And I believe it was the city of Covington, when they gave their fire department entrance exam, the last time they had in the 70s. Wow. That's how many people showed up to take the exam. The state police are having trouble recruiting people. So, my feeling is it could be for other factors, related to employment, but people do know that there is not the promise that there used to be for hazardous duty. And I'm very much in support of reversing that, turning our Tier 3 hazardous duty people back into a defined benefit plan.
Got it. Okay. Okay, so the General Assembly passed a $22 billion education budget, which rejected some of Governor Bevin's proposed cuts. However, there were many programs that were affected, such as funding for textbooks and money for professional development. Additionally, school districts will only get a $19 increase per student. What are your ideas to support funding of our public education system?
Well, I do believe in fully funding our education system. I think there have been other guests on this in this position who have said, when you don't cut funding and you do it for 10 years, or you do it for almost the last 10 years, we're falling behind on the level of the cost of living. So it's almost like a 15% cut in our benefits, or in our funding on education. And that's not to talk about the obvious cuts, the 6.75 cuts that have happened on higher education. So we certainly need to fully fund. We need to find a way to fully fund all of our education from pre-K all the way through our universities. One thing that caught my eye recently was to see that Kentucky's community colleges are the 8th highest tuition rate in the state. And that's another area where, as the workforce needs to be developed, we are far from being attractive for community college level people who either want to move on to get a 4-year degree, or to get in those technical fields where they would be out in the workforce already. Just another aspect of not fully funding our education system. So funding education and how we're going to do it, there are many funding streams that come into the state that we don't take advantage of. And there are ways that we can examine those funds. These are, I'm talking about the tax incentives that happen to companies, where we try to incentivize them to come to the area and become employers. But we have to regularly examine those tax breaks that we give to these companies, so that we can say, are they still working? Are they still lucrative for Kentucky? Are they still the incentive for these major companies to come into the area? And they may be, but I think that if, with $11 billion in tax incentives that are being given away at this point, we can do a deep dive into those billions of dollars, and we don't have to necessarily take all of the tax incentives away, but we can find the ones that are not the most productive right now. And I believe in a dedicated funding stream, and we may get into some of these questions in the future, but taking those monies and say, and just like our lottery system that goes to the SEEK money, we can say we're dedicating it to that fund and have those protections within the legislation that says it stays that way. Has to go there, and there can always be some exceptions, but we have to be very careful. That's to me, you can't pull away any part of our education program to make it as effective as what we need Kentucky schools to be like. We actually want to, we were on a steady path to improvement since 1993's passage of the CARA law, and we have not, Kentucky's not looked upon, we have 7 states around us. It's not looked upon as the place to go to for education. Now there's some very good schools in the area, but we want to make our schools that good, where people look at Kentucky and say, hey, they have great universities, great schools, and not just these few school districts, and say, we should consider, maybe that's where we want to have our family. That's where we want to raise our family. And I think those things are possible. We have to have that whole attitude about education. That's the number one thing that is part of that is Kentucky's budget, and obviously it's a constitutional requirement that we do this, and why not be the best and strive for the best. And I'm a strong believer in that. I know the funding has to be there. There are general assemblies in the past that didn't want to pull away from funding. They even didn't fund pensions as well as they could have to keep more money in education. But there's other ways that there's just other avenues to provide that funding, and dedicated funding streams I think are really important to shore up our education and to fully fund our education system.
Okay, so talking about that, what do you think about the tax credits for private school tuition? Because that will take money away from our public schools.
Tax credits for private schools, some of the ideas behind it are well-intentioned. For the most part, the way I understand the bill that was recently introduced last session is for low-income people to be able to have the advantages of some private schools. I am opposed to it because, for one, it does take money away from the public schools. But I'd like to have that advantage available to anybody that likes to seek it. But that's where the private sector really can come in through their own fundraising, their own programs that can tuition forgiveness, whatever it is, that they would ensure that they leave a certain amount of spots available. And really to come through the Kentucky's tax system or to get some kind of a tax incentive to do it is just not the answer.
Right. Now, what about charter schools? Because that seems to be a push here in
charter
Kentucky.
Schools. I'm completely against the bill that was passed. I'm glad to see we haven't funded charter schools yet. We haven't set up the mechanism to do it, and I certainly will oppose funding if elected. The research and whatever charter schools can do and provide, it certainly isn't there. There's a lot of research that says, yeah, it can provide benefits, but it's more anecdotal. And there's more research that says, it pulls away from public education. And we really have to avoid that, as I was saying, for almost any reason. And, charter schools, especially for-profit charter schools, it just is antithetical to really what we want to do in Kentucky with our public school system.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on making medical marijuana legal and using revenues possibly for pensions and education?
I'm in favor of medical marijuana being legalized in Kentucky. You know, they are considering, the past session they considered several bills. There were some hearings even this summer, very recently, related to medical marijuana. I do agree it may not be the panacea for our pension system, but it is an avenue of perhaps some dedicated funding to pensions. And again, we're talking about pension obligations, and once those pension systems at a higher level of funding, we can move that funding back towards the general fund. We set up the legislation that way. But yes, medical marijuana is it has many benefits, and it's not a topic that I have great amount of knowledge on, but I have seen enough to know that it already has some proven benefits related to opioid addiction and how it can pull people from that, or for pain relief. And of course, that's the main area of what we're looking at in Kentucky, is to provide this relief for our kids, mainly in areas where the other side, I guess, is the claim that there's not enough medical research, and it's a circular argument. There's not enough medical research because it's still a federal level, Schedule I narcotic, and so you're not allowed to do the research. And really, it's been proven all around the country. I believe 30 other states are now permit medical marijuana, and the anecdotal evidence is almost overwhelming. And the non-addictive qualities of cannabis and all those things are all coming to light, and we shouldn't be so slow. And I've heard other people say, it's just like an expanded gaming, we're so far behind everybody else, it's hardly worth getting into. And I got a feeling the same thing's going to happen with medical marijuana. So while we look at it as a possible funding, we can move funding from this source into a particular thing, we should look more onto the human level of what it can do, and that's what I'm very interested in.
Yep. Yeah. So moving on to the opioid crisis, you talked a little bit about how medical marijuana can help with the need for alternative pain medications, but what about big pharma and physicians overprescribing? How would you address those issues as part of the opioid crisis?
Well, that part of the opioid crisis, the opioid epidemic, it is also very unsettling that we sort of brought this on through the over-medication, the over-prescriptions of these narcotics and painkillers. Big pharma they're an easy target, but perhaps they should be. They've done some wonderful research over the years to and they have maybe some of the best intentions to increase or reduce the amount of pain that people are in, for whatever reasons that they have the pain that they're in. But then to take it overboard or to over prescribe and do the things that especially in vulnerable populations, I'm disturbed by that. I'm certainly in favor of our Attorney General pursuing those the recoveries, that is, the liabilities that they've created. And that's the way it works in this country, through the availability of the infrastructure of our whole system. Is that our legal system too, is that we have this free market where you can do this, but you're also susceptible to the liabilities that you might have created, and I believe that's the way to go after it, is through the legal system, and our Attorney General should do that.
That's great. Okay. So higher education costs are skyrocketing. The average college student ends up tens of thousands of dollars in debt upon graduating from college. Do you have any solutions for this crisis? How can the Kentucky government support our students in their pursuit of higher education?
Well, first of all, I'll start on the community college level. There was a bill introduced late last year, and it was criticized as being something that was last minute or not possible. But it was free community college for Kentucky residents. perhaps qualifying Kentucky residents, but I think it's a wonderful idea. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, with Kentucky being the 8th highest state as far as charging tuition for community college, it's almost the opposite of what I'd like to hear. I'd like to hear we're maybe the least expensive, but still have the quality that we need. Higher education has taken major hits over the last 10 years, and those just turn into fees for the middle class,
Right.
for the people who can't afford it, and to create the incredible, tremendous tuition debt issue that we have throughout, this state and the country is just setting up what many are calling, the next crisis, the next real big downturn in the economy. And with student debt on the level of 20 years, 30 years, and even beyond that, it's that stress also that is, it's hard to factor in there, but it's there. It's like I saw something in the paper today where millennials are not concerned about their 401k, or they're not saving for a 401k. I mean, the average amount of money in people who even have 401ks is $12,000, and that is, just to get back to tuition debt, that is just another stressor in this economy, and it is something that we have to look at and say, if we're going to make Kentucky, the state where education is an envy of the other states, we can't make it so that it's so prohibitive that the only people who are getting into college are able to be successful, and then when they get out of college aren't in such debt. We've got to make it more affordable for everybody, and we have to find those streams. Wherever that has to come from. We have to find a way to make it less expensive, to go to a Kentucky college. And we have a great university and college system in the state, and it can be improved. But we're there, as our university presidents are telling us, they're hurting, and it is, obviously because of the cuts. And I think there's been other people talk about the percentage of what we used to pay in tuition 10 years ago or 20 years ago to what we're paying now. It's becoming way out of whack.
Can't afford it. Yeah. Okay. According to the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, the majority of job growth in Kentucky is in low-wage jobs. So the governor is always talking about the decreasing unemployment rate. But there are these low-wage jobs. 8 of the 10 most common occupations in our state pay less than $15 an hour on average. And in Kentucky, 76% of jobs are in occupations that have median annual pay below 200% of the poverty level. Kentucky ranks 9th worst in the nation. How would you address the issue of working class people not getting ahead in this current environment of pro corporations? Or, I mean, we have this booming economy, but the wages are stagnant.
Well, they are, and this is a very broad economic question. So I'm really going to hit on a couple things. I am in favor of raising the minimum wage, and I think it's important. We probably have to do it incrementally to phase it in, but to up to at least $15 an hour. I'm very much in favor of better labor laws, a better labor environment for our labor organizations, so that the working people who work at both the public sector and private sector have more of a voice at work. And when you have more of a voice at work, it usually means you have better wages, better safety, better benefits. So that raises the level. Really, it raises everybody's level. And Kentucky is like the rest of the nation as far as labor participation, as far as in labor unions, we're about 10%, but falling and continuing to fall. And on the private sector, it's in the 6% range, but it's in the public sector, it's in the 30s or 40s. But still, when that happens, throughout the years since the introduction of the National Labor Relations Act that created the ability to join a union and to have collective bargaining, the rules have been kind of falling and stacking and hurting the ability to stay in a union, be in a union. We might talk about right to work in a little bit. And I just think that the labor laws that we need to strengthen need to all become stronger on behalf of working people and working families, so that we have the ability to raise more people into the middle class. Unemployment rates are going down. It's part of the way the economy is swinging. This was happening much before the governor got into office. There wasn't much that he's necessarily done. It's great. We don't want to have it change it drastically in any other way, but we need to share.
Right.
Now is the time. We don't need tremendous tax cuts. We don't need to fertilize the field of incentivizing people to come to the state, because we have a great state already, and we have good hardworking people in Kentucky. We need a lot more education, a lot more training, apprenticeships, and all those things, and which is another area I would support strongly as far as our workforce. But we need to raise the level of our workforce, and that can be done with better labor laws.
So this has probably been 10 or 15 years ago, but I thought that we used to get like a cost of living raise, and then you would get a merit increase if you deserved it. And it seems like that cost of living raise has gone away somewhere, and now you're just getting maybe a merit raise, and so we're not keeping up with inflation. And to me, that might be something that, could we bring that back somehow as, you get a cost of living raise?
Cost of living raises have been voted in for some pensioners, but there's the state itself that doesn't provide that. There's also cost of living raise, COLA raises for Social Security recipients, but as far as collective bargaining, that's usually where the raises go. They go somewhere near the cost of living. But that you're right. That phrase, that term, is not even used as much as it used to be used anymore, and we are far from keeping up with cost of living. Wages have been stagnant below that level for almost since the mid-'80s, and that separation continues to happen. It might be an overused phrase, but the separation between the 99% and the 1% continues to happen. But it's really the people in the the 30% to the 70%. They're really the meat of the middle class, is where, unfortunately, those numbers are going in the wrong direction to continue to go in the wrong direction.
Right. Okay. So we talked a little bit about minimum wage. So there was a Senate Bill 17 that wanted to increase the minimum wage to $10 an hour by 2020. You've said that $15 you think is good, but incrementally. Do you think that would hurt small businesses, and how would you help them?
Just like federal law related to minimum wage and wages, there are carve-outs, or there are regulations that affect small businesses and smaller companies. So you're not necessarily eligible you wouldn't have to pay minimum wage if your company was a certain level, or especially family members. And there are countless exemptions related to wages and how they have to be paid in the federal law and in the state law. So we could probably build some of those nuances in. I'm sure we can. But if you can create these wage increases, even for the small businesses that would have to adhere to the new rates, to do it incrementally. And I think this is my feeling, but it's also, I've heard this from many other small business owners, is that once they know the rules and they know what it's going to be next year and the year after that, and maybe 5 years from now, they plan for that. And so will it cause tremendous inflation? That's one of the what the critics of minimum wage will talk about. I think history will show that does not happen. There are just some cases of it, but for the most part, increases in minimum wage do not cause great inflation, and that's it's an easy cry for the other side, I guess, to say, but it's just the evidence isn't there, and we are falling further. We're going the opposite direction, and we certainly can increase the minimum wage, and that's something that should be built in. You were mentioning COLAs before. That can be built into the minimum wage, and I'd like to see Kentucky do that. Okay. Ohio has done something like that.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about skilled workers in this area, and we don't have enough. How do we support our workers, our potential workers here in Kentucky, to make sure that they're skilled? So when we do have these companies coming in, because there's the displaced workers, and then there's our high schoolers coming out who may not want to go to college, and how do we get them to the skills that they need to?
Well, there are many programs. There's many ideas related to this, and some of them have to do with labor and labor organizations. They've been and they are involved with apprenticeship programs throughout the state. I'm encouraged to see the current administration is at least continuing most of those programs, but we really need to build on them. Our vocational programs in schools are not what they used to be. And we need to go back into that. I remember being in high school, and we had plenty of the people I went to school with. They would go off to vocational school for part of the day. There are many good paying jobs out there. There are many areas of our economy that are demanding, this kind of availability in the workforce, and they're not there. We have some pretty good programs in the state of Kentucky and throughout the country related to having the development of relationships between the companies and the schools and education, and making sure that we are educating our kids in a way that will prepare them for the future workforce needs that are there. It's hard to keep track of. It's like we need the code people, but we need them now, and we needed to be educating our workforce for that, maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And that really kind of gets back into something related to education. It's a little bit off the topic, but what kind of education should we be focusing on? There's people who want to emphasize the STEM programs, but STEM in what way? As far as is a more well-rounded liberal arts type education, is that going to really what's going to be prepare people for the workforce, no matter what it becomes? In 2020 or 2028 or 38. So those are things we really need to look at. I think the development of those relationships between our companies, our employers, both in private and public sector, and education is going to be important to really help develop the workforce that we need.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about right to work, because it's obviously anti-union. What are your thoughts about Kentucky adopting a right to work environment? And if you are elected, what would you do about this issue?
Well, that's pretty easy. I can tell you, as one of the people who were in the hallways of the General Assembly of Frankfort in 2017, when in 5 days they passed the two major anti-labor bills. It was another disturbing thing. That was coming right out of the bat, where the party in power came right out of the gate with these bills that they said, I guess they thought we're going to have to pass these real quick, otherwise there's going to be too much resistance to them, and so let's rush them through. And we shouldn't forget these things. I'm completely for the repealing right to work, but we have to be realistic. For one thing, Kentucky is now the 25th, 27th state or so that's gone right to work, and nobody has gone back. There are better ways to go to a right to work. And right to work, of course, it's a misnomer. Yeah. There's no rights guaranteed. There's no work guaranteed. It really is a program or a policy that will lead to lower wages. That's the attraction. The governor will say, we need to do this to attract companies. Well, that means those companies are looking for, lower paid employees. Right. Now, look, does that match the cost of living in Kentucky? I don't think so. We didn't have a right to work need. We didn't have the kind of high wages in the state already, so we needed to go right to work to attract more people. And it really, the only evidence of what right to work really does is it hurts labor participation. This is another one of those rules, another one of those ways that we see labor organizations and what they have, and the amount of people who are part of unions just go down and down and down. It's just another rules that is stacked against it. So completely against right to work. And yes, I would be for repealing it. You know, I have some ideas and perhaps some ways that we could do it creatively.
Good.
So we'll have to wait till we get to the legislature and see what the appetite is for it. But you know, it could happen. I'd love to see Kentucky the first state to pass it and then repeal it.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay. So there's a new tax system in place that's a huge tax cut for the wealthiest Kentuckians. And basically there's a 5% flat tax, which lowered taxes for the wealthy and raised taxes on the poor. And then they put into place this service-based tax on the small animal vet charges and the charities and the things like that. So, do you support these proposed tax changes, or do you? What is your idea for different?
Well, they're all terrible. I could probably stop right there.
Yeah, that's right.
But I'm very much more in favor of a fair income tax-based system, one with a graduated income tax, and not these consumption-based taxes. These small business taxes, there's 17 of them that were passed in the last assembly, which were another piece of legislation that was rushed through.
Right.
You know, and we're seeing some of the consequences of, you know, legislation that people aren't brought to the table, and they take their time to figure out what's all the nuances of the good things, the bad things, what can happen as a result of some parts of the legislation while it wasn't examined nearly well enough, and we've suddenly have a tax on nonprofit tickets to their events.
Right.
And I think I heard in a hearing the other day that the hospitals, as a result of the tax increases, there's certain hospitals that have like this $250,000 fee or fee that they now have to pay as a result of these tax increases that were for small businesses.
Wow.
You know, the legislators are saying, well, we're going to correct those things. We're going to correct those things when we get back. Well, they do need to be corrected, all of them.
Right.
Now, the tax cut for, you know, our wealthiest, the things that are meant to incentivize, I guess, job growth or businesses to come to the area, or are, you know, it's trickled down. It's trickled down. Again, this is another theory that has really not proven to be a long-term economic development program that works well over time. You know, education is, which education is the number one thing you can do long-term for economic development, but not the kind of tax cuts to the wealthy, tax cuts to the big corporations that is supposed to eventually fall down to the rest of us. Is just it's never really happened, and so I would be going back to a more of an income-based system. The Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, as a matter of fact, had done a very nice study and recommendation for a graduated tax system like that, where we actually needed to bump up our taxes on people making over $175,000 because that was the max. That is well, prior to the recent tax cut, that had been the max that you would max out. It's 6%, you know, and the amount of funds that will come into Kentucky related to these changes will just be further strapping our education system and our other financial needs, you know, when we have to realize those things for the next biennium.
Right. Okay. There was a House Bill 227 which passed, which is basically an anti-solar bill. It rewards monopoly utility companies and punishes consumers. And it's put rooftop solar out of reach for most Kentuckians. Kentucky needs to keep up with the rest of the country in terms of clean, green energy. What would you do to help protect and promote the use of clean energy?
Well, I would have been against the net metering bill. You know, whatever we can do to promote clean energy, we need to. And it's no secret that Kentucky gets in the 80%, even up to 90% in certain parts of the state from coal. And while we can phase out coal and phase these kinds of jobs into those areas, that is almost sounds like the perfect solution. It doesn't happen as organically as that. You know, it may need some help in the state, and it certainly was getting a little help with the availability of net metering, and that's where, you know, if you produce more energy than you're taking in, then you get
You
a credit. You get to sell it back, and they changed those rules. And even before this House bill passed, we had only like 1,000 people in the state who had the ability to take advantage of this. At some point, there will become a need where we don't need to incentivize it as much as we had been previously. But in my opinion, we weren't even there far enough already. We're slow. Kentucky is slow in developing our wind and solar energy areas, and it's understandable. We had this dependence on coal, and we have, the coal industry was that important, and it's still very important, and we can't overlook that. But I think even people in coal country are starting to really realize we've got to look elsewhere. Right. The smart people, the people who have been, looking at it with a little bit of vision, they recognize what's going on, and the market itself is changing the energy needs, and we need to encourage, more clean energy, and that's something that was a mistake, and what can be done to further encourage it. I'll be in favor of any kind of legislation that further encourages clean energy.
Great. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about guns, because we've had school shootings here in Kentucky. We just had a shooting in Cincinnati last week. Should Kentucky have stricter gun ownership laws here?
Well, as a nation, I think the reaction to the gun violence that has been, especially in our schools, has been, almost overwhelming. That something needs to be done, and we get that into that position of something needs to be done. But when it comes down to the fine details, we don't seem to get that much done. I'm in favor of the common sense things related to guns that has been talked about quite a bit in the last couple of years, and that would be really a universal background checks that are shared and available, and through the technology that we make them even available for the gun shows, so that there's not those kind of loopholes. Smaller magazine levels inside of guns, but you can do these things. You can have regulations. We regulate everything. We regulate our banks. We regulate our free speech. You can't go into a theater and yell fire and get away with it. And we should never. I don't think we'll ever have any situation where we're taking away guns from people. Right. We just have to recognize there's certain levels, there's certain limitations. They can be common sense. Somebody isn't allowed to have a bazooka, and I don't even know if that's even talked about very much anymore. But there's got to be some regulations, and I'm for those common sense regulations.
What about your thoughts on arming teachers in public schools? Because this was kind of a push last spring.
I'm not for arming teachers in school. I'm not for asking our teachers to take on some other part of the security of their kids in their school. That is, I'm for resource officers being available to do that. I think we need that. Unfortunately, we need that in our schools nowadays, and we need to come up with the funds to do that. I know that some are doing it even on local levels. Local schools are doing it, and I encourage that, and I think it's great. But that kind of stress related to having teachers potentially armed and being ready to handle some kind of school shooting is there's some benefits, but very, very few. The other potential problems with it far outweigh us arming our teachers. Now, if teachers are wanting to do it, and there's a program to do it, and there's a way to do it without it really becoming, I guess, the way that a school handles school safety, that I don't want to take away that right of teachers, that's for sure, but to make that the way Kentucky handles our school safety problem, I'm not in favor of that.
Okay, Governor Bevin basically has declared war on Medicaid recipients, where he's tried to take away the Medicaid expansion. And also he did that whole thing with the dental and vision benefits and trying to do the work requirement. How will you support the Medicaid system here in Kentucky?
Well, I'm 100% in support of the expansion of Medicaid and 100% against this Medicaid waiver program. Even though it's, a friend of mine is now the cabinet secretary, and we go back a little bit. We've done some work together, and I know he was very involved in creating the waiver, or creating the program. And he's a nice young man, and he's very committed to what he's doing. But you know, even with friends, you can have disagreements, and this is what happens. And so we don't need to create more barriers to get health care. And you know, even if the best intentions is to move people into the workforce and give them more responsibility, in essence, what it's doing, the Medicaid waiver is potentially going to move almost 100,000 people off of health care insurance. And when we increased our health care roster, or our health care recipients of Medicaid to almost 500,000, we dropped Kentucky's uninsured residents who didn't have health insurance from 14% almost down to 5%, the greatest drop in the country. And to move away from that, I think, is just the complete wrong thing to do. To affect dental and vision benefits is another wrong step, and it was a misstep by the administration. You know, I don't mind saying, you know, I was single payer before people even know what single payer was, but a Medicare for all, health care for all, I think would be a tremendous advantage to our health care, our health in the whole country, in the state. And you know, Kentucky has had very poor health outcomes. It's something my wife, who's a nurse and a researcher, feels very passionate about, has educated me very, very well on, and that is the poor outcomes that we have had and the ways that we can, and well, it's the incentive what that should do as far as moving us towards health care, towards healthier days, that we have people who could come to work and come to school, and to not have to that other worry about you know, how it's going to break them, how they're going to go bankrupt, and pre-existing conditions, and going back to the things that they're talking about taken away from our residents. It's crazy to me.
Okay, that's all of our questions. So now I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk to our audience again and tell them why they should vote for you on November 6th.
Well, thank you, Andrea, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you and to talk about these issues. You know, I feel strongly that I would be the best candidate for the 65th district, and I am the best candidate for the 65th district. You know, as a firefighter, I had to kick in a few doors and bust windows to save lives, put out fires. I made life and death decisions. I am that kind of person, you know. When you don't have time, when you have to depend on your training, when you depend on your experience and your best instincts, you make those decisions, whether you know they are life and death. And in this case, with the state of Kentucky, we are dealing with some life and death decisions. And I am the person, I think, of the people who are in the race for the 65th district who has the most experience, the strongest connection to the district, and we'll make those decisions, and we'll make them on behalf of you. So I look forward to doing it for the citizens of the district, and I hope everybody gets out and votes November the 6th, and so we can have active participation in our democracy. And with that, I'll say thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Buddy, for coming tonight, and thank you for joining us. And please, if you go to our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, you can watch copies of these interviews. And don't forget to join us at 5 and 7 every Sunday night for another episode. Have a good night. Thanks.